Well, everyone, Activision-Blizzard's second shooter of the year has came out, and unlike Overwatch 2, this time it does appear to be going just that little bit better. So, to get to the headline number, $600 million of sales, which does mean that immediately this game is basically fighting with big Marvel projects in terms of, like, their initial box office gross, which is pretty damn impressive. This is all, of course, before Warzone 2 has came out, and what is also kind of funny about this is if they have surpassed $600 million in revenue from this game, you know, you could do some napkin math. It would come out to somewhere in and around 10 million players, which itself is rather funny compared to the 25-odd million that Overwatch 2 accrued, albeit over a longer time, but as a free game, which is all kind of interesting.
Yeah, and in terms of like 10 million sales, as a very rough estimation, it could be anywhere from like 8 to 12, depending on regional prices and stuff. But fundamentally, that's a lot of players. You're looking at like the biggest properties of Sony, and they break 20 million after a couple of years generally. And that'll be like, they'll break 10 million. Like I think Ghost of Tsushima broke 10 million after like a year and a half or something. And then you think of like revenue that comes in, and that has to be adjusted down for sales and stuff like that, because those obviously happen, especially when it comes to retail sales and stuff like that. So it's not all direct revenue straight away. So it is like, this is exceedingly big. This is, you know, second to GTA big. And after Vanguard being basically what people saw was one of the death knells of Call of Duty because of the high end, they're like, no, here's Modern Warfare 2. Everyone likes Modern Warfare 2 again.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think just about anyone could have seen this one coming.
Yeah.
Right? Now, maybe people who did not grow up at the same time period as us, maybe they would not have saw it, but I remember Call of Duty 4 coming out. I remember Modern Warfare 2 coming out in 2010. That was pretty much the biggest thing in the universe at that time.
Cultural phenomenon.
Yeah, absolutely. And given the reception of the first one, which is a funny one because, yes, it is somewhat hammered by some of the pros, but it is a game that was very successful by players. Yes, the usual talk of skill-based matchmaking does arise, but it's a game that did actually manage to produce the numbers. And when you actually go to the launch, there's another thing that I noticed is a bit different to Overwatch 2, Matt, and that is that they've actually put a full game out.
Wait, hang on. But Michael, this is 2022. What do you mean they released a full game? What do you? AAA publishers don't do that anymore. Are you serious? They actually went, hey, here's a game that has like content in it that's complete, roughly, and is relatively free of awful nightmarish bugs that belong in early access and beta titles?
And,
really?
And this is what makes me wish Overwatch 2 came out the way that, to play into it, that Papa Jeff intended. Because it's a bit weird, right? I mean, if Overwatch 2 basically rots on the vine because it takes too goddamn long to come out, obviously that's an issue. But this is a situation where people were able to go, play the big campaign, jump straight into the multiplayer, then know that Warzone is coming, then also knowing that Warzone has a Tarkov-like mode in it or something like that. Now I think it's called DMZ or something.
Yep.
That is a lot of strong stuff for a game, and as we can see, per what the bean counters will like, you know, surpassing $600 million of revenue in a very, very short order. So it just kind of shows if you go and you put out a new game that seems to be pretty damn good, a really big IP, it can do well. And I suppose it is just frustrating. We got the early version of Overwatch 2 with all of the wrinkles associated with that and its free-to-play model, whereas perhaps there is a future where we could have had Overwatch 2 set up as a live service, but still fundamentally a premium game, and all that would entail. Not to make this an Overwatch 2 video, but it does actually make you think, because I very much doubt that Overwatch 2 is generating numbers anywhere close to this. And in fairness, Overwatch is not Call of Duty, but I think in the long term, it's an interesting thing to puzzle over. Now, they did do things which will juice up their pre-orders, right? So if you pre-ordered, you would get access to the campaign a week early. And that did mean that technically I pre-ordered it because I wanted to get ahead of that. And also, yes, I wanted to just play the campaign, right? Now, this is also something that other Activision-Blizzard titles have done pretty well in the past. World of Warcraft is actually one where if you pre-order the new WoW expansion, you get to play the new race and class early. They did that for the Allied Races, of course, with the Battle for Azeroth expansion. Those things were pretty damn successful. So, yeah, those pre-order incentives that really are in and around early access, they can be extremely powerful, but they can also be a double-edged sword, which is of course something that more than anyone, Electronic Arts has learned, where as a part of the EA Play subscription, forget what it's called now, but of course you had Mass Effect Andromeda, that got absolutely clowned on in its early access. Funny enough, they patched up some of the most clownable things within like 2 weeks, so it was an entirely avoidable drama, but they were just a bit silly. Then multiple Battlefield games that have had issues have also had the early access model. So it's quite funny how EA have really tried to benefit from this, but they've ended up releasing subpar quality products, and ultimately that has meant that those early access people are the canaries in the coal mine, meaning they are the trendsetters, which then for EA has meant that they've always been behind the public narrative of their games. Whereas in this situation, the campaign is, I would say, I'll talk about it later, but actually pretty damn good.
Yeah, I think I've seen a number of people talk about how, like, there were definitely some bugs that would have annoyed people that were kind of happening to some people during the pre-order early access, but then they got that in time for the full release. So it's like the most engaged, especially when you've got the audience, right? Because the audience of Call of Duty is going to be a lot of people who are super engaged, but because of how big and how wide the audience is, you're going to have a lot of people who just see it in the shop and buy it, or they're going to go buy it on launch day because they're not aware of the pre-order stuff. Because I think people tend to forget how many people who are like, because you know the whole like 50% of people on the planet play games, whatever it is they talk about, you know, those
you, me,
numbers,
and
like,
all the viewers, we're all the capital G's.
Yeah, absolutely. We're the people who will actually know what's going on and stay attached to the news and follow the news. A lot of people just see Modern Warfare 2 out now in the sign of their local shop and go, I'll buy it now.
And as we'll cover soon, they may be surprised what they're actually getting on that disc.
Well, that's for sure. But for this, it's kind of worked where, you know, there's a Reddit post here saying whoever decided to release campaign a week early is a genius or needs a raise or a bonus, because the idea is just, everyone gets to play the campaign and then the multiplayer unlocks. So everyone gets a little bit of time to practice, everyone gets in there, but also campaign bugs are ironed out for people who get there. But that's the thing where you do that with a game that's really buggy, you get clowned on. You do that with a game that needs a little tiny, like a paint to finish, and it works. So it's all about, like, you can use the same strategy, and you see all these publishers try to use the same strategy over and over again, but it's about the execution of that strategy that actually matters. And this is a case where maybe because there's 20,000 developers working on it, they actually were able to get something kind of done instead of everyone else, but it just seems to have honestly just worked out.
Yeah. Another thing that, of course, it will help is the monetization funnel for the Vault Edition. The Vault Edition basically just gets you, it gets you a few things. It gets you the Battle Pass, 50 tier skips, you know, basically the usual. So, I suppose almost like a little digital deluxe edition style thing. But yeah, every time you would boot up the campaign early access, it would put this straight in your face.
Yeah.
Though funny enough, and in stark contrast to the other shooter that came out for Activision-Blizzard, whenever you go to the in-game store right now, and I just thought this was interesting, there's only 2 purchases.
Interesting.
Purchase number 1 is the Vault Edition. Purchase number 2 is basically a bundle for the Call of Duty endowment that I know it supports veterans in the US and UK. It may cover the Canadian. I don't exactly know, but it's a charitable organization for veterans, which, hey, in fairness, if you are going to do a military-themed game, all right, you know, that all seems fairly in alignment. So if a little bit of charity can come out of it, and then that's, you know, no doubt a good enough thing. But it is interesting that there's so few additional layers of monetization. Now, obviously, those will come later. We all do know that. But it's just interesting how they launch like that, I think. So, in terms of overall things, then, basically, it worked out pretty well. There was one bit of a caveat, though, with no early press copies.
Oh, yeah, of
now,
course.
that did end up... I mean, in this case, because the game overall was, like, good enough, that ended up being fine. But obviously, if the game was a big old disaster, then people would be able to construe this as a way to maximize pre-sale revenue, and have this situation like, oh, the game's not out yet, but I could just jump in, and no true reviews are out yet. I suppose if the game was a wash, the most that you would get is PSA, this looks like it could be a problem, posts on gaming news websites, but other than that...
Yeah, that's where I think it's like, you can kind of go, okay, well, it didn't turn out that bad this time. But it's like, no, this is something you should not do as a publisher. I mean, maybe you should, because it'll get you more money, but, on a principle level, you should have early access copies out to reviewers, because that's the whole point of the way that industry is built that way for purpose, to stop consumers getting shafted by buying products that don't work. Obviously, that's not always worked super well, and obviously people will just say, but people don't care, they'll just buy the game anyway, and that's fair. But it's not about the overall situation. It's about how many people are going to, like, even if it's a couple hundred people feel shafted, then that industry should be there to do that.
Totally.
But
now, to take a look at some of the reviews, we're looking at a 76 in OpenCritic, 64% of critics recommending.
Ooh, they're not getting their bonus this year. I don't think they're. I think they're going to be into the holidays per devs.
So this is a fun one, because to me personally, right, I would have to. It's funny. Modern Warfare 2019 for me does get. You could give it a few more points, just because of the very large change that it represented. I think that their new engine just feels fantastic, right? Like, stuff feels good. Whatever they're able to do with animations and sounds, like when a gun just lets rip, it feels like it's this chaotic thing, in your gun dude's hands. So, I think I'd give this an 8, honestly. And what that really means is, what I wanted was a reasonable follow-up to 2019, and I do feel like I got that. Going through the campaign, I do know there were some criticisms of the first half of the campaign being a bit too linear. The funny thing for me is, I actually really like the mix. Some of the linear set pieces, like the house raid in 2019, yeah, they were totally linear on-rail segments, but they still work for me as a part of the overall cohesive experience.
Yeah, well, they used that to tell the story, right? They literally locked you into these movements and this movements because they wanted to actually completely represent a feel of that happening, which is different to, you can't do that if you're like, here's a Hitman level. You're not going to have that same experience. So it's like there are multiple tools in the toolkit, as long as they're used effectively, I guess.
And then later on, I think they do a good job of basically changing things up on the regular, right? So there's an example of a mission that takes place, I think it's in Spain. But it's just that thing of, hey, you've got to get 3 things, 3 big buildings, sniper rifle, stealth. You can go do this whatever way you want. When you're playing in something like veteran difficulty, you actually do have to think about what you're doing, or you will just die. Later on, there's almost... survival horror would be leaning too much on the horror, but there is the little survival segment where there's even a crafting mechanic that they bring into the gameplay of you... almost Last of Us style, scrounging around for scraps to implausibly craft plausible items, right? Like some bizarre jury-rigged chemical bomb, or, a little gas bomb or something. And as much as it does kind of go past the point of credulity, it is actually pretty evocative as a mechanic. I won't, totally spoil the situation, but, you're going through this area. There are bad guys. They are being very, very bad to the local people. You are on their wrong side. You're injured. You don't have any weapons or anything like that. And they effectively do make your character feel weak and vulnerable. And you actually have to scrounge about for resources. I thought it was pretty well done, actually.
Yeah, that sounds like they went, hey, we have an intended experience for the players to feel. How can we implement that during game mechanics? And that is the pinnacle of what you should aim for as a game designer and developer. Create that. How are we going to make the players feel, and then actually execute on it? That's perfect.
I think what is ideal in a game like Modern Warfare 2 is actually something akin to StarCraft 2's missions. I know that you've played Wings of Liberty, and it does a good job of every single mission having a thing about it that's different, right? A different mechanic. There's a solar beam thingy that's just annihilating the whole map, or, this is a wave defense, or this is a that, or whatever. This does a pretty damn okay job of that. It then does a decent job of having its sort of core cast of, kind of reimagined characters, one or two new faces, like Alejandro, whose character basically just is, I am the most badass man in the world. I am completely relentless. I mean, I don't know, he's basically Mexican Special Forces John Wick. Like, there's not a single thing that can stop Alejandro. And you know what? It's not plausible, but he's a fun character. So, yeah, it basically works on all of the core levels I think that a Call of Duty game should work. There are some people who are a little bit angry about it having a somewhat ripped from the headline story. Now, that said, it's very easy to take things out of context, right? Like the whole, right-click to de-escalate.
That's funny.
But ultimately, that was just them having, in my opinion anyway, having some sort of reasonable mechanical interaction to quickly produce that. It's made, and this is another thing that people on Twitter, they got very angry. I think they maybe assumed this was like American police, running around like hooligans with guns, which I suppose is a thing that does happen. But in this case, you are two Mexican Special Forces guys who have hopped the border wall. You're running through an American trailer park, and you're keenly aware that it's the United States of America that you're in, that all these people in the trailer park could have guns.
Yeah.
So, so it's a funny little situation where you do get that, like, right-click to de-escalate, almost soundbite that kind of goes off on Twitter. Very shortly after that, people basically, the read on it could be that they just are like, you're two Mexican fellas who have hopped the border and you've got guns. I'm going to pull my pistol out and shoot you because rock, flag, and eagle, America. Which, yeah, it's one of those things. It's like
you can get it, right?
They're doing the thing, but they're trying to play lip service, but they are still totally bounded by being a Call of Duty game and what that means.
Yeah.
For a bit of rip from the headlines. Of course, this happened during the past administration in America, but there was that strike on the Iranian general. I don't know if it was like a drone strike or a rocket strike or something, but I mean, he's dead. A very similar situation happens like toward the start of this game. So it does do that thing where it rips some of the headlines out, remixes them. To be honest with you, I don't really mind that. It is a fun tonal, I described it as a love child of Michael Bay and Catherine Bigelow. So it has these aspirations to maybe feel like an action scene in a Catherine Bigelow movie, like say Zero Dark 30, right? The the raid scene. It's got those ambitions on the one hand, but on the other hand, there's totally Michael Bay shit happening, and it's all about striking that balance. And I actually feel like this campaign did a pretty good job at striking that balance. Yeah. And then as I go into the multiplayer, this one takes time to adjust to. I know that the pros preferred Black Ops Cold War to Modern Warfare 2019, and it's a funny thing where I am significantly better at Black Ops Cold War than I am at 2019, yet I prefer 2019. Funny little situation, but overall for me, I enjoy the movement, I enjoy the gunplay, stuff looks and feels really, really good. I think the gun customization, it is very strange in that it's essentially based on like the receiver, like the sort of core tech. So, you've got to use the Lockman 7.62 and to then unlock the 5.56 to then unlock the submachine gun that's basically an MP5. So it's a bit weird and unintuitive, but there's actually quite a lot of shared attachments across weapons, which does mean you can get started pretty quick, and weapons themselves do rank up quite quickly. So far, maps, to me, it's like mixed to positive, but that said, my opinion of the maps has actually just been increasing as I have played them more, so it could be the usual thing with a game like that. Overall, I would say it's a slice of Call of Duty in the same vein as Modern Warfare 2019. A lot of people will already know if this is up their alley or not. I think it does not humongously exceed one's expectations based on that, but it largely does meet them. And for me, who just wants to honestly turn my brain off a bit, have a bit of a romp, I can do that. Or in the odd situation where I want to hop into a search and destroy, I actually can have quite a bit more tense match that maybe would remind me of my sweaty younger days with Pro Mod.
Yeah, it sounds very much to me like, on the whole, they're actually kind of making, obviously, because I think a lot of core gamers have a lot of kind of distaste towards Call of Duty for being so culturally massive, being so dominating the conversation, just because there's maybe a little bit of snobbery involved in that. Because I know I tend to feel the same way. It's like, just fuck Call of Duty. Go play a real game. That kind of vibe.
Yeah, it's popular for a reason, though.
Yeah, but then, especially as like I've kind of dabbled in the newer ones a little bit, you can tell that they aren't sitting on the laurels going, we're Call of Duty, we can do whatever they want. They know they've felt threatened at times. So they know they have to have their core identity. They know they have to make a game that's actually going to be played by people and not just rest on that cultural capital, especially when it comes to the single player stuff. It's like, it seems like they always know to try and kind of push a little bit into the territory they want to push into, while also actually, and this is where you kind of think, fully remaining true to what the Call of Duty feeling is, despite obviously being through a bunch of different developers over the years and having so many close calls with, that one didn't do so well and people didn't like that. How do we get that right again? And it seems that whoever's working on Modern Warfare reliably kind of goes, it's hard to actually explain exactly what the vibe of Modern Warfare is because it bounces off so many different things like you were talking about. But it seems like, and that's why reviews are kind of weird, because reviews take it very, very seriously. And it seems the game takes itself just seriously enough for you to go, what's going to be the best for players here? And it seems, at least in single player, and as far as how multiplayer plays, they kind of have that done right. They're like, that is very, a lot of respect deserved, I think, for the teams there. When you could imagine how much worse it would be if they didn't kind of play it safe, if they just went full, how do we wreck our players and get this out as quick as possible?
I mean, look, you look at Electronic Arts and the way that, with DICE, they've managed to consistently cock up things with with Battlefield, and Vanguard was a miss, and that's fine. Misses happen, I suppose, but Cold War didn't set the world on fire, but it's pretty good, right? Like, it did pretty well for the multiplayer. 2019, they get quite a lot of product out there, and while there are certainly a low level of continuing controversy, it is quite something. But I suppose it would have to be, when you think about how much of Activision-Blizzard as a company really is Call of Duty. Now, to get into some of that, this is something that will be very funny for Microsoft. So, this game has done incredibly. PlayStation tweeting out, "Congratulations to Infinity Ward and Activision on the biggest PlayStation launch ever for a Call of Duty game." Now, this is funny. On the one hand, it's a nice thing. On the other hand, it's Sony saying, hey, look how important Call of Duty is. Look how good Call of Duty does in PlayStation, which, of course, amid the fun regulatory environment right now, where Sony are gearing up to fight the acquisition of Activision-Blizzard by Microsoft as much as they can, you can see this as, I guess, continued brinksmanship, right? Because there has been this level of public brinksmanship on both sides.
Yeah, it's really funny because they're often so nice to each other. You could just feel the seethe going on. As soon as I saw that tweet, I started laughing. I was like, oh my god, whoever wrote that was like, they're either laughing or they're really furious at the time. Like, we have to get these bastards. So it is interesting that they are fully going into the, hey, look at how big Call of Duty is. We'd be devastated if it weren't on our platform anymore. We wouldn't want that whatsoever. Yeah. But it is also crazy that it's like, when's the growth of video games going to stop? When is something like the fact that people like mono game Fortnite or Apex, when's that going to actually put a dent into Call of Duty? And the answer seems to be never, because it's just Modern Warfare 2 again. And you'd think people would have bought Modern Warfare 1 and be like, I am satisfied with my Modern Warfare based nostalgia. I'm going to move on to like the I guess the more modern way of video games being played. Because you expect, right? You think, okay, well, it's all the Call of Duty nostalgia, is what you might think. And you've got, okay, well, there's a Modern Warfare 2 audience. Obviously, over time, that's going to splinter off because people get older, fall out of games, etc., etc. You imagine that's going to be slowly smaller over time because there's nothing really building it up. And you've got all these like new cultural phenomena like Fortnite and Apex and stuff like that kind of siphoning off the new players. So it's like the funnel of new people coming into gaming. They're not coming into gaming for Call of Duty. You would imagine, based on how all of these games were really, really big and huge,
it's almost
and have this different model.
Population pyramid thing.
Yeah, but then this is still the biggest launch ever. They're going, there must be contrary to what you would imagine, thinking of it from like that way, of Call of Duty is kind of the old thing, and these things are the new hot things. Call of Duty is still managing to grow despite all of that. Honestly, extremely strong opposition.
Yeah,
you're going, holy shit, this really is like an absolute behemoth.
Well, it has massive. I guess it just has massive penetration in Western markets. I guess where I would be interested then is, and this may be a bit extreme, but what happens whenever the population sizes of all of these Western countries begins to decline, right? Like when the death rate's above the replacement rate, and you maybe have like just a little bit of, the ripples in a population pyramid, and then you have a situation where gaming's growth, and this probably is already the case. You maybe have a situation where, speaking of population pyramids, that's a fun one for China, but where, a bunch of gaming growth is like being driven by moving into other territories.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's maybe some sort of interesting demographics thing to talk about, but to be honest, I'm not the person to do that.
In a 10-year look at the industry,
thinking,
that's more important than maybe like a 2 or a 5-year. And it's a little bit out of our capacity to model effectively.
Yeah, but I think what it does mean is that Call of Duty, it will need to think about how it can pick up new people. And I guess the way that these games have been able to do that is just by nailing the tentpole basics.
Yeah, by just being, this is literally the best on the market.
Yeah. Or
if not the best on the market, like by a country mile, it's the best on the market within a slight niche of shooter gameplay. Where it's like, hey, do you want I suppose the Warzone tool changed that. It's like, hey, you want the Battle Royale feel of like actual, I guess, high skill first-person gameplay? Apex. Oh, you want the more classic multiplayer? Call of Duty. Oh, you want the third-person? Fortnite. And that's basically, along the I guess, the biggest amount of players, that's probably ultimately the choice.
I think Warzone is absolutely key in keeping that influx of new players. Right, because that being free, that's what's going to allow younger people who don't really have that investment or brand awareness to get in.
Yeah. There is also, I guess, the whole like general vibe overall, where Fortnite's definitely, you kind of go, oh, Fortnite's a children's game, and then you go to Apex and it doesn't really have like a super obvious vibe. It does, right? But it feels a little bit more mature and a little bit more varied. But then Call of Duty is, the dude bro shooter, and I think as long as in the UK they have Royal Navy and Air Force ads on the TV, I think the dude bro military aesthetic is just going to be a huge draw to people growing up.
Sure is.
It just feels that way.
I watched the movie Dog Soldiers last night. I'm 100% down. Now, the game has, of course, had issues, right? Like, that's normal. We do expect that. It's obviously unfortunate, so, we'll put a pin in that. A funny thing, though, for the people who bought the actual game, there's 1 gigabyte of data on the disc. Now, that does mean
that's a small game.
Yeah, a tiny game. Wow, they've fixed all those criticisms. No, but it does mean that if you are maybe thinking of buying a game traditionally, there's a chance you might not be able to play it the same day. And I think the more and more that happens, it does weaken something about gaming. Not maybe for the likes of us in a city where we can get 400 or 500 down, right? But in a lot of places, the idea of, okay, this would take hours and hours and hours on my internet, fine, I'll drive down to Best Buy or Walmart or whatever, pick the game up, come home, put it in, and then I can play it. And I can do all of this within half an hour. There's like a little bit of an impulse purchase, I think, that does get hit there. And we should say that while this is happening more and more, as is continually being pointed out, like, this kind of thing it's not an industry standard on consoles, so it is a bit more of an outlier, a more increasing outlier, but still something of note that we should talk about, that like it's bad because you buy a disc and then you have to download 151 gigs. It almost reminds me of times where people would buy a PC game and it would activate in Steam, and then they get confused and be like, okay, now I just have to download the game in Steam. Why do I have this disc? And that's kind of happening now.
I feel like if Steam didn't exist in the way it has for so long, if Steam wasn't the if Steam wasn't the good guy that everyone goes, oh yeah, everything you do is fine, and for us, if people didn't feel that way, this would be a lot more reviled. Because I even saw there's those like generic subreddits where it's just everyone on the planet's on them, like Ask Reddit or something like that. There's something I think it was one of those, and it was something about, what are we not in the golden age of anymore? I thought that was an interesting question, so I went through, and one of the most upvoted and awarded posts I saw was ownership. We're no longer in the golden age of ownership. We don't own things anymore. People rent everything, or they buy things on leases, which is like kind of ownership, but not fully in the same way, just go and buy stuff. Or people buy like cheap things that are easily replaced, as opposed to owning things that are like, hey, this is something I've bought. I will have it forever, have it for a long time. I think people are kind of more, as society's moving away from just buy the thing, own the thing. I think people are starting to feel a little bit more in games. They're like, wait, so I don't actually own this game. What happens if, you know, the worst happens and I'm out in the woods with my console and my game and my game disc, and you know I'm just cycling.
Rambo can't play his COD campaign on his downtime.
Yeah, I'm just cycling on a generator to get enough power to play Call of Duty, and it won't do anything. What am I buying? Oh,
it does make the core point that selling a product is yesterday's game. Yeah. Right. Instead, what you want to do is sell essentially a self-running service. Yeah. Now, the content side of that is not self-running. Yes, there is an ops requirement on running these services, but ultimately, products that act like services, that is really where the money seems to be. Now, 4 issues. I'll quickly rocket through these things. Yeah, performance issues. They sure are there. Suffice to say, my ass has been utterly saved by setting DLSS to very performance focused, which does mean that the game looks like ass. I'm in a situation, yes, it's a laptop GTX 3070, which isn't a bad card. It runs most things pretty damn well. It ran the campaign a hell of a lot better than it runs multiplayer, I know that much. So that's been a problem. There have been crashes. I had 2 crashes in the campaign when I was playing through it. There's also an attachment tuning system, which they've had to turn off because it was also causing crashes. Another weird thing, Xbox and PC have crossplay being locked, but PlayStation can disable it freely. And that's always the thing where the console gamers are very angry at the PC, you know, aimbot mouse and keyboard people, and then the PC people are all angry at the aimbot auto-aim console people. And everyone's always angry at each other.
I have seen a post today that was tracking very well of people saying, don't play this on PC, because once your like SBMM gets high enough, people with auto aim on console will just wreck you because the aim assist is way higher, or is like way too aggressive. So we get into a problem where like obviously on PS4 or PC you go, okay, well I don't want to crossplay, but the Xbox problem's there, and that's because Xbox and PC aren't different platforms, right? Yeah, they're the same platform, the same Xbox Live platform. So you're gonna, you know, turning that off would feel weird and wrong and splitting the platform. So you're like, ooh, that's a bit funny.
Yeah, instead what they should do is just do a base and control mode, which some other games actually do.
Yeah,
I think Fortnite does that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So another funny thing then is, turns out people who own this museum are not particularly happy about it being a map in a shooter where lots of people get shot. So there's some announced maps have been unannounced while maps were in beta are now AWOL, because apparently the design team used real world designs and locations without getting permission. So essentially, the Getty Museum are not particularly thrilled about this. Also, the pros aren't allowed to play the Crown Raceway map because it also could have issues because it's so heavily inspired by the Marina Bay F1 track. And originally it was called Marina Bay Grand Prix, which that's just asking for trouble. So that is all rather silly. But to go to the future in this, Infinite game. Not really, and Infinite Warfare has already happened, but kind of interesting here. So the game has came out, right? In 20 days, Warzone 2 will come out, and the cross-game Battle Pass will come out, as will Call of Duty Headquarters, which I think is just suspected to be some glue that kind of binds it all together.
Is it some glue that binds it all together in a way that's just kind of branded nonsense? Or is it actually that Call of Duty is the first one past the post with the Assassin's Creed Infinite idea?
Now that would be interesting.
That's the fun thing. You'd imagine they'd build more around that. But I think, because remember the way they used to have all of the Call of Duty, there would be the 3 different modes, or whatever gameplay would be on the one screen kind of idea?
That's still there.
It's still there?
Yeah, if you're in multiplayer and you want to play single player, it's a reboot.
Yeah, so you imagine the idea of, do that, but then you add more things to it. You add more games to it. You add DMZ, you add Warzone. Oh, look at that. You now have this, especially when you think they're planning campaign DLC for the game, you go, oh, okay. Have you actually just been the first one to win the video game as platform with Call of Duty? Maybe that's reading a little bit into it, but you almost certainly see they're going to do that.
Yeah. So as a part of this ongoing content strategy, then we've got raids. So these basically are following the events of the campaign, and they happen in seasonal phases as part of an ongoing story. Honestly, sounds pretty neat. I mean, I almost think about Spartan Ops back in Halo 4 and the idea of a continued narrative. So hopefully that actually works. I enjoyed enough the campaign of 2019. I don't think it really stuck the landing, though, but it would have been nice if that story continued instead of them just doing weird pseudo-canon stuff in Warzone that they would then ignore. So that's, I think, good enough. But then also, there is the fact that there will be no new box release Call of Duty game in 2023. Now, this, of course, is them seeing that Vanguard didn't really work out, and that in a world where Warzone and whatever the current year's Call of Duty, when they are so tied together, if the year's Call of Duty, which kind of forces a bit of a retheme or whatever of the Warzone, if that doesn't work, that really damages them. So they're taking a year off, but apparently their plan, according to leaks, is they're going to lean heavily on it being the 20th anniversary of Call of Duty, and they're basically going to release a single-player and multiplayer sort of expansion. And honestly, for me, this is exactly what I would actually like. Also including modes and features that are not present in the Infinity War games like zombies. So, look, the idea that there's an expansion where you get basically, you know, big new set of maps that includes greatest hits of loads of Call of Duty games, to me, as a player, that would offer good value, and I would be happy to pay for that. And then also, there would be another campaign. And honestly, another campaign in this world, yeah, that's fun. It's a fun little romp. I'd enjoy that.
We're actually just going to go full circle. Like, okay, game is service, game is a live service. What do we do? Make a game and then release expansion packs for it. That's what we've done. It's like, why are we making loads of single player games? Make lives. Yeah, oh my God. Yeah, it is funny how all of that stuff is like, you know, what's the saying? There's nothing new under the sun. It's just different repackaging in different forms of what we had before.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Of course, like there will be the other monetization, you know, with the battle pass, the tiers, and the store with the bundles, you know, the things you would expect. But overall, that's it for the launch of Modern Warfare 2. Broadly, it's been a success. There are definitely points of texture, but certainly compared to like Overwatch 2, which has now had 4 heroes be disabled, you know, from its launch through to now with May being disabled until November 15th, and all the backlash to its monetization and all of that stuff. It is just funny to compare the two Activision-Blizzard shooters.
Yeah.
How big of a miscalculation I think the monetization in some aspects of Overwatch 2 have been, even though, as we consistently said, it is a fantastic game.
That's always the painful part. Good game, monetization ruined it. Hang on, is that a metaphor for the entire industry as a whole? Because we get some good-ass games, but we're getting some dumb-ass monetization involved. Obviously, the monetization has to pay for the games at some point, but you do have to wonder, to what extent is this actually working? And will this ever crash? Or is it just going to continue? And is it like, where are we going to find the equilibrium of, yeah, this monetization's fine, let's continue playing the games? Or are we just going to see dumbass experiments for all time? I don't know. As long as they actually remember that people want to play good video games, and not just play good video games like, oh, they're designed well, but are good experiences overall. As long as people can roughly keep that in mind, that I think will be okay. And I never thought I'd say that about Call of Duty. Whereas, like, obviously there's a number of problems, but generally speaking, it seems to have found that line of, we're going to be reasonably fair to our customers and make a game that they want to play. And then that's what we call a mutually beneficial arrangement.
Yeah.
Instead of whatever EA is trying to pull half the time, or whatever Blizzard are pulling half the time.
It's funny now that we're like 4 years away from Black Ops 4 with all the bullshit that it had. They've turned things around. It feels fair enough. So there you go. That's the situation. I think a bit of a win for Infinity Ward and the 11 million other studios that have probably supported on this game. And certainly some food for thought. All right, that's it from us. Of course, subscribe to get more of our content and all that jazz. There'll be more up tomorrow as well. We'll see you next time.